If you guys are like me, it is early season bass fishing time and it's time to get on the water. In today's video, I'm going to share with you my top 5 baits for early season bass fishing. Smallmouth baits, largemouth baits, and baits you guys can use to just go out and have confidence and catch fish this spring. Now, I have a ton of stuff to do on my boat, but I'm hoping to get out this weekend. And I know some of you guys are regulated on when you can start to get on the water. But for us in Michigan, we have a year-long season, catch and release until Memorial Day weekend. But I'm stoked to get on the water here pretty quickly. So I'm trying to get my tackle dialed in, and these are my top 5 baits that I'm going to have rigged up for my first trip out. Before we start to talk about the baits, all the products that I'm going to talk about are going to be linked down in the description below. And also, huge shout out to the guys over at Serious Angler Podcast. Awesome podcast, awesome new merch, so go over and check them out if you haven't already. But without further ado, let's dive into my top 5 baits for early season, early spring cold water bass fishing. These are going to be both smallmouth and largemouth baits, but I'll try to go in depth on where, when, and what species I'm using most of these baits for. And the first bait we're going to talk about is really no surprise, I'm sure for most anglers. We're talking about a little Ned Rig, and a Ned Rig really is deadly in all seasons. You could supplement this if you wanted with a tube, but for me a Ned Rig is just a bite getter, and especially early season when I'm trying to locate bass, a Ned Rig is going to be one of those baits that I can just kind of throw on and know that if I put it around fish, I'm going to get bit. And you guys know I love Duo Realis. It's going to come up multiple times, I'm sure, throughout the season. But this is a Duo Ned worm. This is brand new to the market. It's a Wriggle worm, Wriggle ND worm, and it's got weird bulb shapes throughout the worm itself. That's supposed to give it a little bit more unique action on the bottom, and it's made of that kind of elastomer style material, that stretchy material, so it will float. It's stretchy, it's going to last a long time, and they have some really unique colors, which is pretty typical. So a Ned Rig is really a critical bait for me in the springtime. It's a bite getter. It's one of those baits that I can just throw out there and know that if I put it around fish, they're going to bite. And typically on my Ned Rig head size, I'm going to go with like a 3/16 or a 1/4 ounce size head, especially if I'm searching for fish and using this Ned Rig really quickly. Once I have fish located, I'll kind of go down to a smaller 1/8 ounce size, but most of the times I'm going to be throwing that 3/16 or 1/4 ounce head to really kind of bomb around and figure out where these fish are located, especially when it's really cold and I just want to get this bait on bottom in front of their faces. This is the Do Molds Midwest Finesse head, and then I just believe this is a Gamakatsu 604 hook. So pretty simple profile, pretty simple bait, but it's a bait that's going to catch you a lot of fish and probably no surprise to most of you. I'm going to throw this on the TFO 7.3 Medium Light Plus. This is the Resolve model, which is their brand new series of rod. I like this. It's a longer rod. I can make long casts, incredibly sensitive for those really light bites. The next bait is one that you guys heard me talk about quite a bit towards the end of last season, and this is a bait that can be fished on bottom, or depending on what style head you use, can be fished up in the water column, and that is a small body paddle tail swim bait. This is a very versatile setup. Obviously this is with the football head mold that I was throwing at the end of last year, but you can switch this up and go to like an 1/8, a 3/8, or a 1/4 ounce head and keep this bait higher in the column to trigger those fish to bite. This one here is on a 1/2 ounce head, meant for deep water fishing, which is something I like to start out the season doing, is looking for those fish in a little bit deeper water. But a swim bait is just a super versatile way to catch them, especially when you have those fish located. You can cover a lot of water with this bait, but it is a bite getter and it triggers fish to bite. As you guys are getting out there early season, I would recommend picking up a 3 to 3.5 inch size swim bait, more of a flat sided body, more finesse style profile, your Kitech Easy Shiner style baits, because that's going to trigger more fish to bite. It's going to have a lot more tight action than your big boot tail styles, so that's what I would recommend. Then I'm going to be throwing that on a 7'3" medium tactical bass TFO rod. I have 10-pound test braided line to 8-pound test fluorocarbon, especially if I'm dragging that bait on bottom. I'm going with a little bit heavier line. Bait number 3 is where you're going to notice a difference between smallmouth and largemouth baits, but we're going to be talking jig fishing. Now, if you guys watched a lot of my videos at the end of last season, I caught a bunch of smallmouth on a little Beast Coast OW sniper head, but I also love to flip a compact jig early in the spring for largemouth, especially when those fish are pushing shallow. A compact jig catches a lot of big largemouth when they're pushed up into that shallow cover. So I'm going to dive in a little bit on both of those baits. So the first bait, especially for smallmouth, when I'm fishing around those bass that are located on or near bottom is going to be this OW Sniper Head. And this is a compact finesse style jig, and it gets a lot of bites. You can fish it in the same areas where you fish that Ned Rig, but it's a little bit bigger profile, and in my opinion, it gets a little bit bigger bites. You can also fish it a little bit faster and cover water more with it because it gets to bottom fast, and it really triggers those fish in that area. I like to pair it with a small craw style bait. This is the Great Lakes Finesse Craw. This is a brand new bait to me, but I'm super excited to get on the water and check this thing out. It has little floating claws on the back end, which Nathan had a lot of success with at the end of last year. Having those fish coming over with some sort of floating style bait up on the back of that helped him catch a lot more fish that I was just straight up missing. So this is going to be my overall jig setup. Now when I'm picking up OW Sniper Heads, I'm pretty much exclusively going to be fishing a 1/2 ounce size. If I'm fishing deep, really deep, like 20 plus foot of water, I'll probably put it on a spinning rod. It's going to allow that bait to stay on bottom on lighter line a lot better. But if I'm fishing less than 15 foot of water, I'd like to fish it on a bait caster. I have a little bit more control over that bait, and I can set the hook pretty hard, which is a lot of fun, especially when we've been sitting inside all winter long. My bait casting setup is going to be a TFO 7'3" medium heavy. I'm going to put it on 12 or 10 pound test fluorocarbon line. Let me maintain that bottom contact a little bit better and trigger those fish to bite. And if I fish around really heavy rock, I might bump that up to 15, but most of the time I'm trying to go with the lightest line that I can get away with. Then a high speed gear ratio bait casting reel. As you look at my largemouth fishing setup, this is a pretty standard jig fishing setup. This is a compact style jig. I like to fish a compact jig like the Beast Coast Little Mag in a 1/2 ounce size. It's going to get you more bites early season. When the bait fish are small, the crawfish are small, I like to fish a smaller profile jig because it's going to trigger more fish to bite than your big style jigs that you would normally fish in the middle of summer. It's a bait that's going to fall fast, but it has that compact profile that helps you get more bites. I'm either fishing like your green pumpkins, your magic craws, or if the water gets really dirty on me, I'll go to like a June bug color, which matches the color of those early season bluegills really well. And then I'll pair it up with some sort of bold color craw pattern. This is an Excite Baits Raptor Tail Chunk, which has floating claws. Again, I think that's going to be really, really key because it's going to help those claws stay up off the back. All the colors and all the sizes and baits are going to be linked down in the description so you guys can go check them out. And then the rod that I like to pair this with is a TFO 7'5" heavy rod, but it's a moderate fast. So what that means is it's going to bend deeper in the blank. It's going to help you keep those fish pinned, but you can really set the hook. And I fish my jigs on 20 pound test fluorocarbon pretty much exclusively. This is my dedicated largemouth jig rod. I also fish some wobble heads on this style of rod, but that 20 pound test really lets me hit those fish and know I have control over them when I'm putting this in heavy cover. Typically fishing this around wood, heavy reeds, or early season grass and docks that's going to hold that heat a little bit better. So having that 20 pound test is really, really important. Now we're going to dive into some moving baits, some baits up in the column. And this should come as no surprise because you saw me fish this bait so much, especially early season last year. This is a Berkley Stunna. This is a 112+1 model. Really, a jerkbait is a very, very effective cold water fishing tool. This is going to catch largemouth, smallmouth. You can dead stick this bait in the middle of the column, have these fish come up to it and fish it really slowly, or you can fish it more aggressively for fish that are more active and looking to chase baits. You have a lot of control over this, and it also works really well with live scope and forward-facing technology. So jerkbait is a bait that I catch a lot of fish on, especially early season when those fish are looking up, keying on bait fish, and in that cold water, you have a lot of control over this thing. And you know, obviously the 112+1 model gets a lot of talk because it does dive a little bit deeper, but one nice thing about that bill is you can fish this around cover, and that bigger bill is actually going to help this bait sit a little bit more nose down and deflect off cover more effectively. So where the 112 regular will sink a little bit more, you'll have a little bit more control over it. This is going to be a bait, the +1, that you can fish around cover really effectively with that bigger bill. I told you guys I'd mentioned Duo Realis a little bit more. This is a jerkbait that has caught me a ton of fish early spring. Largemouth and smallmouth both. This is the Duo Realis 100 SP, so it's a little bit smaller profile jerkbait, 100 millimeters, but it triggers a lot of fish to bite, especially in this AM Edge color. AM Edge is a really unique color. It has a darker purple hue on the back with the chartreuse belly. I think it triggers those fish in that little bit off-colored water, but it's a phenomenal clear water color as well. If you guys can tell, this bait's caught a lot of fish And it's probably one of my favorite jerk baits when I'm fishing in less than 10 foot of water. This is a phenomenal jerk bait that catches a lot of big fish. They also have the 110 SP size. It's a phenomenal bait, has a better weight transfer system, so in the wind you can cast it better. But if you can get away with it, this 100 SP from Realis is another one of my favorite baits. The way I'm going to choose jerkbait color is really based on water clarity, and so the more off-colored or the more overcast, I'm going to go with more matte finish or white-based baits, and the cleaner the water or sunnier that it is, I'm going to go with more translucent style baits like this Realis AM Edge color. The rod that I like to throw this on is a TFO 7-foot medium rod. It's a little bit longer style rod, but it has a short handle on it, so I can have control over that jerkbait, make long casts, and really have a lot of action in that rod, which causes that bait to dance a lot. If I'm fishing this bait more slowly, that longer rod not only gets that bait away from me, but allows me to have more positive hook set in that cold water when that bait's sitting still. And the second I go to twitch that bait with fish on it, I can drive those hooks home with that 7-foot rod. It's going to move a lot more line than like a 6'10". That's why I like to fish a 7-foot rod, especially up here in the north, cold water, clean water where you need to get that bait away from you or set the hook when those fish have hard mouths. That 7-foot TFO Resolve is going to be what I'm going with most of the time. And then a high-speed 7 or 8-speed gear ratio reel and 10-pound test fluorocarbon line. Again, it's about castability. That lighter line is going to allow your bait to work a lot better. And so this is my favorite jerkbait setup when I'm fishing these fish, especially in cold water situations. And then my personal favorite way to catch them in the springtime is going to be on a crankbait. We're going to talk about a couple different styles of crankbait here, but a lipless is one of my favorite ways to catch these fish. Works great for smallmouth. It's a really effective tool for largemouth, especially when you're fishing around shallow grass. But as you guys can tell, this bait has seen a lot of fish. I caught so many smallmouth on this Spro Aruku Jr. It's a 1/2 ounce model, small profile bait on St. Clair last spring, and I basically wore the paint off this thing. It just catches a lot of fish. The way that I'm going to fish this for smallmouth is typically going to be along or near bottom. So I'm going to cast this bait up, let it sink to bottom, and use slow hops, or I'm going to slowly reel this bait through the column with some stops and pauses. As that water starts to warm up, that presentation is going to change a little bit, but in cold water, this is a technique that I can fish low, slow in the water column, and trigger those fish to bite. I'm going to give you guys some other lipless crankbait options, but for me, this Spro Aruku shad, if I'm fishing less than 15 foot of water, is a really effective bait. A couple of other options if I'm fishing along bottom for smallmouth are the Realis G-Fix 68 or the Lucky Craft LV500. They're both very loud baits. This Realis has a very thin profile, so you can cast it a long ways, but they're both very heavy. This is a 3/4 ounce, and this I believe is a 5/8 ounce. So they're both heavier baits, smaller profiles that stay on bottom really effectively and start to vibrate very fast. So when you lift that rod, they start to vibrate almost immediately. And then when I'm picking colors for these baits, I like to pick natural style colors, fishing low and slow along the bottom so these fish get a really good look at the bait. So the Realis G-Fix 68 and Thule Perch is one of my favorite colors. Looks like a goby, looks like a perch, looks like a small bait fish along bottom, or they have perch style colors. And then in the Lucky Craft LV500, Ghost Minnow is a really good one. I believe smallmouth bass, and they have a crawfish color that are really, really good. I'll have all those colors linked down below for you guys to go check out. And then as you start to talk about largemouth style lipless baits, especially largemouth baits where you're fishing that up in the column around grass, you can't really have a conversation about lipless baits without talking about the Bill Lewis rattle trap. Really, really loud bait, has hard edges to it. It's a phenomenal bait that you can cast along and rip through the grass and trigger reaction bites. It's a really, really phenomenal bait, 1/2 ounce size, and I like to fish bright colors. So I'm fishing, you know, your reds, your oranges, maybe a blueback with chrome if that water is a little bit cleaner, but a Bill Lewis rattle trap is tried true and catches a lot of big largemouth. And then another one is a Spro Red Eye Shad. It's a phenomenal bait, especially when you're using the yo-yo approach because it has a rounded belly on it. So when you lift and drop that bait, it has a really erratic action on the shimmy on the fall. So if you're looking for some largemouth style lipless baits, these are two that I would recommend. And if you're just looking for kind of like a middle of the road, best of both worlds, that's where that Spro Aruku shad that I mentioned at the beginning of the video is going to come into play. So those are my top 5 baits that I like to throw in the early spring going for fishing largemouth and smallmouth bass. If there's any baits that you guys prefer, baits that maybe I missed feel free to let me know down in the comment section below, because I always love to hear baits that you guys would recommend that I check out, or maybe that I would have some success on in the spring as well. Hopefully this video gave you guys some information you can use on your early season trips to the lake. If you guys want to check out some content of me on the water early season, click this video right here. Hit this button if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, and if you guys want to check out any of the products that I mentioned, they're going to be linked down in the description below. So thank you guys so much for watching. As always, take care, tight lines. God bless. Pursue passion.